Bride takes revenge after mother-in-law tries to ruin her wedding.
But before we start, please make sure to subscribe to m&rtv and hit the bell so you never miss any upload from us. Also, leave a like right now.
A wedding is always supposed to be a wonderful and joyous occasion. It's a moment when we come together with our friends and family to celebrate the love and union between two people. It's a time for happiness, laughter, dancing, a moment for magical memories to be made. But unfortunately, there are times when even the best planned weddings don't quite go smoothly. For one reason or another, certain obstacles and challenges can come up along the way, and that's what happened when one woman, Lana, was getting ready to marry the man of her dreams. Kathy, the mother of the groom and Lana's future mother-in-law, wasn't happy about the wedding at all and wanted to try and ruin the special day, almost tearing the couple apart in the process. Fortunately, Lana knew just what to do to fight back against this interfering mother-in-law. Our story begins with Lana sitting behind the wheel of her car. Kathy, the woman who was soon to become Lana's mother-in-law, had invited her out to a local cafe for a coffee date. It seemed strange, especially as Lana and Kathy had never really seen eye to eye, and Lana couldn't work out where this was going. Lana remembers she was driving so slowly on her way to the meeting that a car behind started honking its horn at her. In the end, she knew that no matter what she did to delay the date, it had to happen, so she decided to pluck up her courage and head for the cafe. Many people can worry about meeting up with their partner's parents. In many relationships, it isn't a problem, but every now and then you meet a potential mother or father-in-law who just doesn't seem to like you for one reason or another. This was the situation between Lana and Kathy too. However, Lana wanted to marry Kathy's son, and the wedding was only a month away, so she hoped that her meeting with Kathy would go well. She parked up outside the cafe and looked through the window, spotting Kathy rudely snap at a waiter before walking inside to meet her and find out what this surprise coffee date was really all about. It was strange for Lana to look back on her relationship with Kathy and see how much it had changed over time. When she first started dating her fiancé Michael, Lana wanted to do the right thing and get to know Michael's mom. She invited her out for several little dates and shopping trips, but soon discovered that Kathy didn't seem too interested. Even though Lana invited Kathy out over and over again, she always seemed to have an excuse and eventually just stopped answering Lana's calls. And if ever Lana sent Kathy a text, she would wait for hours before getting a reply. In the end, after a lot of effort for no real result, Lana decided to give up. Usually, if someone never answers your calls and even barely responds to your texts, it's a sign that they're probably not too interested in talking to you. So if they suddenly invite you to a coffee shop totally out of the blue, it certainly seems a little suspicious. That's exactly what Lana thought when she got the invitation from Kathy. She just couldn't understand what it was all about and was very worried and nervous as she walked up to the coffee shop doors. Even more strangely, Kathy had seemed really nice and friendly when they chatted on the phone, which was totally out of character. It was already pretty strange for Lana that Kathy had called her up and invited her out and seemed to be so friendly with her all of a sudden. Her suspicions became even more intense when she heard the place where Kathy wanted to meet. The pair lived in the same city with dozens of coffee shops, restaurants, and other potential meeting places. However, Kathy seemed very intent that she and Lana meet up in one specific place, about an hour's drive away. It didn't make much sense, and Lana was desperate to know why her mother-in-law-to-be had arranged such a strange meeting. She walked inside and took a seat. Before she'd walked into the coffee shop, Lana had sat outside for a moment and observed Kathy through the window. She'd clearly seen the older woman snapping rudely at a waiter, but now Kathy was suddenly acting very polite and courteous. When the waiter came over, she smiled warmly to greet him, asking for a coffee and giving him a hearty thank you, as well as complimenting him on his appearance. The young man seemed happy and surprised to hear such kind words and walked away with a smile on his face. Lana, however, remained wary. She knew that Kathy was a good actress, able to pretend to be nice and kind, hiding her real feelings under a facade. And Lana actually took acting classes as a teen, so she knew all about acting. She'd performed in a few shows and met plenty of actors too, but she always felt that Kathy was the very best. Lana had never seen anyone else so capable of changing from happy to sad or mean to kind in such a quick amount of time. Kathy was a master of emotions, always able to hide her hatred of Lana ever since she started dating Michael. Michael was so blinded by his mom's manipulative acting techniques and lies that he never even realized how much he hated his bride-to-be. Meanwhile, Lana suffered every day, constantly worrying about what Kathy might do or say next. They'd had several run-ins in the past, and Lana's trust for Kathy had gradually broken down over the months. She walked into that coffee shop with fear and worry in her mind, sure that Kathy was planning some new mean trick or some way to try and split Michael and Lana up. Once they'd ordered their drinks and their waiter walked away, Kathy reached into her bag and took out an object. Lana couldn't believe her eyes. So what had Kathy put on the table? What was she planning all along? Well, the item she removed from her bag and placed in front of Lana was a brown paper envelope. Lana stared at it with a mixture of confusion and fear, worrying what Kathy was about to do or say next. And while Lana was staring at that envelope, Kathy began to speak. She admitted to Lana that the pair of them had always had their differences and never quite got along, but she hoped that they could put those differences aside and make the right decision for Michael's sake. That's why she was prepared to make Lana an offer. The young woman couldn't believe her ears when she heard the details. Lana listened carefully and listened to what Kathy was saying, her heart beating faster with each passing second. By the time Kathy was done talking, Lana was simply stunned into silence, staring at her with a look of shock on her face. She could feel her heart racing and feel the heat of her cheeks turning red at the words she just heard. Kathy, meanwhile, looked totally calm and at ease, saying, "It's all right, take a few minutes to think. I'm going to the bathroom," before leaving Lana alone. Lana then took a few minutes to think about what was going on, wondering how on earth she ended up in such a situation. Lana was trained as a nurse. Soon after getting her qualifications and undergoing all the necessary training, she was offered a job in the big city, so she decided to move there and start her new career. She was working on the orthopedics ward, which was something she was specifically interested in. In short, it was Lana's dream job, so she was really excited to make the move and start a whole new chapter of her life. It turned out to be a great professional decision and an even better one on the personal level, as Lana met Michael, the man she loved, while working at that hospital. Most couples can remember their first ever meeting. It's always a special and memorable moment, and many couples even have their own little funny first meeting stories to share with friends and family. Lana and Michael have a similar story to tell, as Michael was actually a patient in Lana's ward when they first locked eyes with each other. Michael had been playing hockey and injured his leg, so he needed to have an operation. He'd been admitted to Lana's ward, and one day, while doing her usual morning rounds, checking the charts and saying hello to the patients, she walked right into Michael's room and shouted out in fright at what she saw. It turned out Michael had gotten a bit bored sitting in his hospital bed with nothing to do and no one to talk to. He'd noticed that there was a wall-mounted TV in his room, but he couldn't find the remote anywhere. So without any nurses around to help out, he decided to take matters into his own hands. Michael had grabbed a nearby chair and was standing on top of it, fiddling around with the TV to try and turn it on. He was okay at first, but then Lana walked in and yelled out in shock, startling him. He lost balance and started to fall from the chair, but Lana rushed forwards and managed to catch him before he hit the ground. Still, he was pretty heavy, so she fell over under his weight, and the pair of them went tumbling down. Lana didn't know what to think about what had just happened. She'd been so shocked to see a patient with an injured leg attempting something so risky and was rightfully concerned for Michael's well-being. She was amazed, therefore, when he suddenly started laughing after the pair of them fell to the floor. Frustrated, she got to her feet, helped Michael back into bed, and then walked out of the room without saying another word. She was quite shaken by the whole event and tried to forget it. But later that day, one of her colleagues called her over and said that Michael wanted to apologize. She decided to go and visit his room one more time at the end of the working day and find out what he had to say. Lana waited until the end of the day and then walked into Michael's room to hear his apology. Little did she know that she was about to start developing feelings for this man, and it didn't take long for Michael's charm to start working its magic on Lana's mind. He was really friendly and funny when saying sorry for what had happened. And he was just so nice about it all that Lana couldn't help starting to like him. Before she even knew what was going on, he'd offered to take her out to dinner as a way of showing how sorry he was, and she agreed. Usually, Lana had a golden rule about never dating any of her patients, but there was something special and different about Michael. Michael was getting discharged from the hospital later that same day, so Lana was happy to have made arrangements for a dinner date, as she wanted a chance to get to know him a little better. Well, she didn't have to wait long. That very same evening, he called her up and they talked for hours and hours. Lana and Michael didn't even notice the time passing by as they chatted until 3 a.m. They arranged to meet up for dinner later that week, which also went really well, and Lana was amazed to see how quickly their connection developed. Like true soulmates, they just seemed to be made for one another, having lots of random things in common and constantly making each other smile. Not only was Michael a very handsome and charming man, but he was also super funny and highly intelligent too. The more Lana discovered about him, the deeper in love she began to fall. He seemed to have everything going for him, with all the things she loved in a man. For example, he'd recently qualified as an engineer and got himself a great job. Not only that, but he was a big family man, often visiting his parents to spend time with them. This was important to Lana, as she always wanted a big, happy family. As the pair met more and more often, they both began to realize that they were supposed to be together. And 2 months later, Michael asked Lana a very big question. The question Michael had for Lana was, "Do you want to meet my family?" And she was very happy to hear it. It's always a big moment when a boyfriend or girlfriend invites you to meet their parents, as it symbolizes that the relationship is becoming more serious and moving to the next stage. Naturally, as a big family person herself, Lana was very excited at the idea of meeting Michael's mom and dad. So, one Sunday morning, she drove out to their beautiful suburban house and introduced herself, but right at the start, things seemed a little strange. Keith, Michael's dad, was the first one to meet Lana, giving her a huge hug to welcome her in, but Kathy, who was standing behind him, was much colder. Lana approached for a hug, but Kathy stepped back and declined. Right from that moment, Lana knew that her relationship with Kathy was going to be a hard one. Kathy took a moment to rudely look Lana up and down before offering a small and cold embrace, very different from the warm smile and happy greeting offered by Keith. After that, Lana, along with Michael and the parents, went to the backyard to enjoy a cup of coffee and some cakes. First meetings with the parents of your partner can sometimes be a little awkward, and Lana was quite nervous, but she was a sociable person and had been quite excited to see Keith and Kathy for the first time. She hoped it would go well, but another little incident ruined the occasion when she noticed Kathy glaring at her as she went to reach for a second cupcake. Eventually, the time came for Lana to say goodbye to Michael's parents and thank them for a nice day. There were plenty of hugs and smiles when it came to saying goodbye to Keith, but when Lana turned to approach Kathy, the older woman simply turned away. Lana had been so worried about the first meeting with Michael's parents, and now it felt like everything was going wrong. She could clearly see and feel that Kathy didn't like her, but Michael wasn't seeing it. When they chatted afterward, he said that Kathy had simply imagined it all, adding that his mom was a lovely woman who'd never do such things. Michael suggested that Lana invite Kathy out for brunch one day so they could get to know one another better. He thought it would be a good way for them to get off on the right foot, and Lana agreed, so she bravely picked up the phone and called Kathy up. "Hello," came Kathy's voice, which was friendly at first, but immediately turned cold when she realized that Lana was on the other end of the line. Rudely, Kathy said that Lana would have to call back another time as she was too busy to talk. Lana politely accepted and tried calling back several times later on, but the phone simply rang out with no response each and every time. Michael then called his mom on the phone. She answered and he handed the phone to Lana, who then made arrangements to meet up with Kathy. Lana wanted to stay hopeful and do her best to build a good relationship with Kathy. After all, Michael was a big family man, so it was clear that Lana would probably be seeing a lot of Kathy in the future, and she didn't want things to be weird between them. Sadly, despite her best efforts, nothing seemed to go right. As soon as Lana arrived at Kathy's place to pick her up for their shopping trip, Kathy started making mean comments, criticizing Lana for how dirty her car seemed to be. She then played around with her phone for the whole journey to the mall, refusing to engage in any kind of conversation with Lana, and only responding to her questions with simple, one-word answers. Once they finally got to the mall, Lana parked the car and then noticed Kathy suddenly talking to someone on her phone. From what she could hear, Lana felt like Kathy was arranging to meet someone else inside the mall. She was shocked when Kathy put down the phone and suddenly told her that their shopping trip was cancelled. Kathy explained that she had a friend in an urgent situation and needed to leave to meet them. She thanked Lana for the ride and simply walked away without saying another word. Lana, meanwhile, was stunned into silence. She couldn't believe what was happening. Lana had done her best. She made a big effort to be nice to Kathy at their first meeting. She'd overlooked all the weird behavior and nasty comments. She'd tried to call Kathy multiple times, and now she'd even gone on a shopping trip with her. But this was the end of the line. She was fed up with being jerked around and treated badly by Kathy, so she decided to never ask her out again. When Michael asked about the trip, she just told him that it was fine, as she didn't want to cause any trouble. Kathy also said the trip went fine, and Michael was happy, thinking his mom and new girlfriend were becoming best buddies. In reality, the truth was very different, but still, Lana and Kathy had to see each other whenever the family got together. Lana gradually got used to seeing Kathy. She knew that it was just something she had to do because she loved Michael and he loved his parents. Kathy, meanwhile, continued to be mean to Lana behind everyone else's back, but acted much kinder and more gentle when the others were around. One time, Lana decided to host a dinner party, inviting Michael's parents over. When Kathy got there, she said that she had an upset stomach and so wasn't going to eat any of the food Lana had prepared. The only thing she said was, "It looks fine," before refusing to eat a single bite. She spent most of the evening in silence, looking around critically at Lana's home, and at that point even Michael started to notice that something strange was going on. Lana was so sad to see how Kathy treated her. All she ever wanted was to find a nice man with a nice family and live out her own happy love story. She'd always hoped that her partner would have kind parents and that the whole family could get together for meals and special occasions. But it looked like that dream would never come true. Instead, she had to deal with Kathy. For one reason or another, Kathy had made it clear that she didn't think Lana was right for her son, and it looked like Lana simply had to accept that fact and deal with it however she could. Eventually, Christmas came around. The holidays are a special time for any family, and both Lana and Michael wanted to spend the festive season with their parents. Since they couldn't decide one way or another, they decided to flip a coin. Michael won, so it was decided that they'd spend Christmas with his family. Lana was sad, knowing that the holiday season probably wouldn't be very merry and jolly with Kathy around, and she was right. Kathy half-heartedly gave her a set of socks as a gift, as well as receiving a smashed slice of pumpkin pie after dinner, while Michael and the others all got perfect slices. It was clear that Kathy would do any mean little thing to try and let Lana know she didn't like her. Kathy was such a good actor that most of the time Michael didn't even notice when she was being mean to Lana. This led to Lana feeling very alone and helpless. She was constantly being attacked but had nobody to defend her, and no real way of defending herself either. She just had to suck it up and cope with Kathy's meanness as well as she could. It definitely wasn't easy, and there were a few times where Lana tried to get Kathy alone and confront her about her behavior. However, every time Lana thought she'd cornered Kathy, the old woman would make up some excuse and get out of the situation. For a long time, Michael hadn't really noticed much of a major problem between Kathy and Lana, but as time went by, even he couldn't ignore all the signs. One day, he and Lana decided to make the big step of moving in together. From that point on, he noticed that his mom's behavior changed greatly. She started calling him all the time. Lana noticed that he always seemed to leave the room when his mom called, and one day he came back from one of those calls with a very angry expression. She realized that he must have finally argued with Kathy about her attitude. It was a small victory for Lana. She was happy that Michael could see what was going on, but worried the situation might get worse. The next day, after Michael and his mom seemed to have an argument over the phone, Kathy called up again to say that she was organizing a party to celebrate Michael and Lana moving in together. It seemed like a way of showing that she was happy for her son and trying to get him back on her side, and Lana could see exactly what was going on. She was both shocked and amused to learn that Kathy hadn't even officially invited her to the event. She'd only really invited Michael, but Lana went along. It was nice at first, with plenty of people and good food for all. Then a beautiful young woman stepped into the party, and Lana watched Michael's expression totally changed. She asked what was going on, and Michael told her that the girl was his ex-girlfriend. Lana and Michael were shocked to realize that Kathy had invited Michael's own ex along to the event, surely in a cruel attempt to try and destabilize the couple and cause friction between them. Still, they decided to just roll their eyes and try to enjoy the rest of the evening. They stayed at the party for a couple more hours, watching as Kathy spent most of the night chatting with Michael's ex and trying to get him to talk to her too. Michael eventually went over to say hello, and his mom quickly excused herself and left them alone. Lana watched, noticing the pair looked really uncomfortable together. She walked over to see what was happening, realizing that the ex-girlfriend also felt tricked by Kathy. As time went by, Kathy continued to do more and more nasty things to the couple. One time, Lana and Michael had planned a trip to Europe. They were going to be gone for about a month and needed somebody to look after their cat. Kathy decided to volunteer, with Lana and Michael agreeing. They had a wonderful time touring around Europe, but their happy mood came crashing down when they got home and saw what had happened. Their house looked like it had been ransacked, and for a moment, they worried that some criminals had broken in, though the reality was worse. Lana and Michael entered their home and were shocked to see that pretty much every single piece of furniture had been moved in some way, and this was true all over the house. In the kitchen, for example, the contents of the drawers had all been messed up and moved around. In other rooms, large items had totally changed position. They spent a whole day trying to sort out the mess, and Lana decided she'd had enough. She told Michael that it was time to draw a line, and Michael agreed. He called his mom and asked for an explanation, but she put on her usual act and calmed him down with her kind words. A little while later, Michael asked Lana to marry him. She was thrilled but worried about how Kathy would react. It was clear to see after all those awful stories and mean moments from Kathy that Lana was right to be suspicious. And that brings us back to her meeting with the future mother-in-law in that coffee shop. She picked up the envelope and left the coffee shop, getting home and parking her car. She took the envelope out of her bag for a moment and held it in her hands before looking at the home she shared with Michael. From there, she decided to make a plan to get back at Kathy, and it all started by heading into the house and hiding the envelope in a box in the closet. Lana rushed into the house and went to the bedroom, taking out a box and hiding the envelope inside before putting the box in the closet. Michael walked in moments later and told her he had some news. He said that his mom had called and said some very strange things to him. Apparently, Kathy had told Michael that she'd always be there for him, saying that if he ever needed her, he should go straight over. Michael couldn't figure out why his mom was acting so strangely, and Lana pretended not to know either. The couple then forgot about it all and sat down to watch a movie together. Meanwhile, Lana was busy preparing her plan. As the days went by, Michael and Lana's big wedding day date was getting closer. Eventually, they looked at the calendar and realized it was only 2 weeks away. And during all that time, Lana hadn't stopped thinking about that secret envelope hidden in her closet. Her parents were paying for the wedding, so she hadn't really had any reason to see Kathy since their coffee date, and she'd been ignoring her calls too. But on the day when Lana was going to pick out her dress, Kathy turned up and pulled her usual mean faces. Lana, meanwhile, just ignored her and happily celebrated the special moment with her mom and bridesmaids. While trying on her dress, Lana didn't want Kathy to ruin a single instant, so she simply ignored her from start to finish. She stayed with her mom and her friends throughout the day and carried on doing the same thing when she attended her bachelorette party and the rehearsal dinner too. Several times during both those events, Kathy kept trying to corner Lana and confront her in private, but Lana was always one step ahead. She had a plan in place and she wasn't going to let Kathy interfere now. Then, on the day of the wedding, Lana woke up in her hotel with good friends all around her, ready to celebrate the most important day of her life. So what had really been inside that envelope? What had Kathy been planning all that time? What was she trying to get Lana to do? Well, the truth is that the brown paper envelope contained $10,000 in cash. It turns out Kathy had been trying to bribe Lana to leave Michael. She'd offered her all that money, promising that Lana could keep it as long as she broke up with Michael and got out of his life. Lana hadn't even thought for a single second about taking the cash. She was so angry that Kathy would even try something so cruel, but she decided to hide that anger and play along while putting her own plan of vengeance in place. The wedding went off without a hitch. Lana and Michael had an amazing time, and they'd both written their own wedding vows too. Eventually, after much merriment and happiness, it was time for the speeches. Usually, the best man or maid of honor might give a speech about the happy couple, but this time it was different. For her wedding, Lana had prepared a special speech of her very own. She had something very important she wanted to share with all of her guests, and eventually, it was her turn to stand up and talk. Now she was going to put the next stage of her plan into action. "Hello everyone," said Lana as she got to her feet and looked all around at the loving faces. All around her, she could see people who loved her and Michael. Many friends and family members had turned up for the occasion, happy to share in the couple's special moment. They say that every good speech should start with a joke, so Lana began with one of her own. "Why do penguins jump up and down on the spot when they meet someone new? To break the ice." After that, she admitted that it might be a little strange for a bride to make a speech. but said that she had something special to share with them, adding there was one person at the wedding who helped make it so special. We can't even imagine how Lana must have been feeling when giving this speech, preparing to shock Kathy with an unbelievable revenge plot. With a huge smile on her face, she carried on with the speech saying, "6 months ago, Kathy told me that she didn't want me to marry her son with worries on my mind, and she offered to pay off my student debt for me." Lana then continued saying she wouldn't take no for an answer. "She made me promise not to tell anyone, and I'm sorry, Kathy, but I can't keep that promise. I wanted everyone here to know what an amazing mom you are. Please everyone, a round of applause for Kathy." The wedding guests cheered and applauded, and Kathy knew she lost. So what happened next? Well, Kathy knew she was stuck. If she revealed the truth, everyone would know how horrible she'd been to Lana, so she had to stay silent and accept that she'd been beaten. Meanwhile, Lana decided to put the money in a savings account, saving it up for any children she and Michael had in the future. Ever since that day, it seemed that Kathy gained some level of respect for Lana. They never became best friends, but their relationship did slowly improve, at least until Lana got pregnant. But that's a very long story for another day. In the meantime, let's hear it for Lana and her amazing revenge plot.